Good evening. I'm so excited to be given the opportunity to present to you today. Let us jump straight in with introductions. I am Serafiina Korpela. I have an undergraduate degree in criminal justice with a focus on criminology from Nipissing University. I am originally from Finland, where I have previously studied biochemistry and English philology at the University of Oulu, as well as some Finnish law courses through the Open University at the University of Lapland. As an employee, I am reliable and dedicated. I have the ability to multitask and prioritize tasks as needed to meet deadlines. I have strong communication skills, both verbal and written. I can work independently, but I am also an efficient member of a team. I have acquired these skills through my studies as well as previous work experience. I have previously worked in the finance department of the gold mine Agnico Eagle Oy as a translator for an international school in Finland, as well as in customer service positions in restaurants and grocery stores. I am able to adapt to different situations quickly, and I thrive in a fast-paced work environment. What I wish for in my career is to work with people in the community. I want to help members of the public and utilize my educational and work background to contribute to the betterment of society. With the introductions out of the way, I would like to move on to our topic of discussion for the day. Reduction of crime rates and the reduction of recidivism is an important goal of the criminal justice system, including the court system. With that in mind, today I want to discuss deterrence theory. I want to discuss what it is, what its origins are, where it stands today, and how we could utilize its arguments in 2021. In addition, I want to discuss some of the shortcomings of the theory, but also its strengths. I will begin by dwelling first into some literature on the deterrence theory. I will then also discuss recidivism and how we in the court system could help reduce it. Deterrence theory has its roots in classical criminology, and it dates back to the 1700s to scholars Cesare Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham. The basics of deterrence theory is the argument that, like all individuals, would-be offenders seek to maximize pleasure and avoid pain. Potential offenders will perform this hedonistic calculation, and if the rewards of crime are higher than the potential costs, they will go on to offend. It therefore follows that to deter crime, society must increase the potential costs of crime through sanctions. According to this theory, punishment must be swift, severe, and certain to deter any potential criminals. Beccaria also believed that the punishment should be proportional to the crime. Deterrence theory makes multiple assumptions about human behavior and criminality. One is that people always make rational choices. We already know this is not the case for multiple possible reasons. For example, people may not always be aware of the potential punishments, making their hedonistic calculation flawed. In addition, research suggests that many arrestees are under the influence of alcohol and/or drugs at the time of their offense, a state in which they are not able to make fully rational choices. The theory also assumes that all individuals will be equally threatened by the same punishment for the specific crime. But while the threat of incarceration, for example, might deter some, others might not view it as a threat. For career criminals, being arrested and incarcerated may be a way of life. The classic deterrence theory also makes a distinction between general and specific deterrence. Specific deterrence proposes that direct experience with punishment will deter offenders from future offending. General deterrence, on the other hand, proposes that indirect experience with punishment will deter the general public from committing crimes in the first place. I will now take a closer examination at general and specific deterrence. General deterrence holds that the threat of criminal punishment controls the decision to commit crimes. In other words, if people are afraid of getting caught and being punished, They will not risk breaking the law. Swift, certain, and severe punishments should therefore lower the crime rate. But is this truly the case? And how do we measure whether or not deterrence is working? Arrest rates and following crime rates are a response to criminal behavior. But importantly, these do not measure the perceptions of individuals, and that is the basis of deterrence theory. Deterrence is controlled by the perceptions of would-be offenders at the time of offending. Deterrence relies on offenders who are deterrable. If deterrence is the process by which would-be offenders calculate risks and rewards, deterrability is the would-be offender's capacity and/or willingness to perform this calculation. Greg Pekarsky assigned offenders into 3 different profiles based on deterrability. Acute conformists comply with the law because they believe it to be the right thing to do. Interestingly, this group is immune to formal sanctions because they would not commit crimes even in the absence of sanctions. On the other extreme are incorrigible offenders who are unresponsive to sanctions and therefore increasing severity or certainty of sanctions has no effect on them. In the middle, according to Pekarsky, lie the deterrable offenders, individuals whose actions are influenced by the threat of sanctions. So what is important for deterrable offenders is the perceived costs and benefits of crime at the time the potential offender is contemplating offending. Perceptions of certainty of being caught seem to be especially important. If a potential offender considers the likelihood of being punished to be very low, costs of crime appear to be low. Even a severe punishment will not deter a potential offender who thinks that the likelihood of receiving that punishment is low. However, research seems to indicate that the factor of certainty of punishment is differentially affected by the type of offense. An individual's perception of being caught is affected by the seriousness of the offense. It is much harder to avoid detection on expressive crimes like murder or sex crimes. As for the factor of severity of punishment as a general deterrence, there appears to be little evidence that it alone deters crime. Perhaps the most interesting and possibly the most surprising example of this is capital punishment. Although the death penalty was abolished in Canada in 1976, some politicians and members of the public want to bring it back as a form of punishment. However, research seems to indicate that at best, capital punishment has no discernible effect on crime, while some seem to suggest it can even increase crime. Some research finds that celerity or swiftness of punishment is irrelevant for deterrence. The threat of swift punishment might work best when it is paired with the threat of severe punishment. But some criminologists suggest that any effect celerity may have can be overcome by the promise of large profit from crime. In fact, some researchers find that the celerity effect, or the threat of swift punishment, only works for those offenders who wish to delay their sanctions. Next, I want to discuss specific deterrence. Specific deterrence is based on the idea that severe punishment would deter criminals from repeating their criminal acts. While severe punishment would seem to increase the costs of crime substantially, and therefore, according to deterrence theory, should decrease reoffending, research seems to indicate that this might not be the case. In fact, what seems to be the reality is that severe punishments actually increase recidivism, not decrease it. Most offenders are rearrested within 3 years of being released from prison, and those with prior direct experience with punishment are most likely to commit new offenses. This is described as a positive punishment effect. But why does previous punishment experience seem to increase recidivism instead of decreasing it? There could be a few possible explanations for this. One is that the received punishment may be perceived to be unfair. When citizens perceive criminal sanctions as being unfair, the legitimacy of the criminal justice system is reduced, which in turn reduces compliance with the law. Another reason for the positive punishment effect could be that offenders are emboldened by their previous experience, either having the belief that lightning will not strike twice, or that they have learned from the experience and are now more skilled at avoiding detection. Of course, it might also be that offenders who repeatedly reoffend are the worst of the worst, offenders who cannot be deterred no matter what. So it would seem that incarceration might delay recidivism in the short term through incapacitation, but not actually deter offenders from future crime. But all hope is not lost. Research does indicate that recidivism rates are lower for offenders who served a term of probation. Rehabilitation and integration into the community may in fact better deter crime than traditional punishment. So why is it that specific deterrence does not work the way one might expect? Criminologist John Braithwaite offers one explanation. He argues that in Western societies, punishment stigmatizes the offender, and in this way excludes them from mainstream society. It can also lead the offender to feel resentful and defiant. This then leads to increased crime. However, it is interesting to note that in collective societies like Japan, crime rates are very low, yet punishment there brings about an enormous amount of personal shame. So what is the difference between the two? Braithwaite makes distinctions between two types of shame: stigmatization and reintegrative shame. Stigmatization is a process of degradation by which the offender is shamed and rejected. Reintegrative shaming draws social shame on the criminal act. Efforts are made to help the offender feel ashamed for their actions and acknowledge the wrongdoing, but also to connect the offender to the community and friends and family. In reintegrative shaming, the shaming should be brief, followed by ceremonies of forgiveness and repentance. Braithwaite argues that reintegrative shaming would lower crime rates and control crime. I would now like to briefly talk about reconceptualized deterrence theory proposed by Stafford and Warr. While the classical deterrence theory makes a distinction between general and specific deterrence and assumes that they are separate, Stafford and Warr argue that it is possible that most individuals have both direct and indirect experience with punishment. They also add in the concept of punishment avoidance, incidents where an individual commits an offense but is not caught and punished by the criminal justice system. So the reconceptualized model of deterrence proposes that there are 4 types of effects that impact a person's decision to break the law: direct experiences with punishment and punishment avoidance, and indirect experiences with punishment and punishment avoidance. Experiences with punishment avoidance may increase offending by lowering the perceived likelihood of being detected. But as we have seen so far, traditional punishment may not be as effective a deterrent as once thought. The perceptions of punishment of a would-be offender are key to deter them from offending, but these perceptions are colored by multiple factors: the direct and indirect experiences with punishment and punishment avoidance, the presence of co-offenders, the possible use of substances, the promise of great rewards, and many more. It may also be that some offenders simply do not perceive any realistic alternatives to crime. Different offenders committing different offenses in different social settings are threatened differently by the same criminal sanctions. But the goal of reducing crime and reducing recidivism are still important to the court system and the criminal justice system as a whole. But if traditional, swift, severe, and certain punishment is not the best approach, what should we do? As mentioned earlier, community sentences, rehabilitation, and extra-legal sanctions might offer a possible alternative to some offenders. Research indicates that extra-legal sanctions can be as good a deterrent as legal consequences. Much of the extra-legal costs arise from the social shame of being formally sanctioned. As social bonds to family and the larger community are important factors in reducing future involvement in crime, prison reentry programs have also been found to deter future offending. And most importantly, as many people entering the criminal justice system have substance abuse and mental health issues, addressing these issues is key. Substance abuse treatment and mental health programs offered in the community or in prison have been found to reduce recidivism. I believe it is necessary to move away from traditional severe punishments that have been found not to work as effectively and that can actually do more harm in the long term, and move towards rehabilitative, community-based sanctions. I thank you for your time.